The tide didn't rise. That's what they realized, somewhere between the sound of whistles and the crack of machine guns. The tide didn't rise, and now hundreds of Marines were stranded on a coral reef, chest-deep in Pacific water, with rifles held over their heads and no cover between them and the beach. Betio was just a strip of sand, 2 miles long, shaped like a boot print, but it was ringed with bunkers, bristling with machine guns, and buried in concrete strong points. The Japanese had spent nearly 2 years preparing for this moment. The Americans had spent hours. On the morning of November 20th, 1943, the first wave hit the reef and stalled. Landing craft stuck fast on coral. Men jumped into the surf and began to wade forward. 500 yards of open water, barbed wire below, machine gun fire above. The sound was like tearing canvas, constant and sharp. Some were hit immediately, others went under quietly, drowning under the weight of their gear. The beach was already littered with bodies when the next wave arrived. There was no place to hide, just open sand, broken palms, and the low thud of mortars falling into soaked craters. Officers barked orders no one could hear. Radios were jammed. The wounded dragged themselves into shell holes and didn't come out. The Japanese fired from pillboxes buried so deep into the earth they barely shook when shells hit them. Interlocking arcs of fire swept the beach, pinning down squads before they could even return a shot. Some Marines dropped and didn't move. Others crawled inch by inch toward the seawall. Those who made it used corpses as cover. They waited for night. On the second day, the tide rose. Sherman tanks rolled off the reef and onto the sand. Marines regrouped behind the low seawall, then pushed forward through gunfire and debris. Bunkers were cleared with satchel charges, one at a time, grenades tossed through slits, flamethrowers hissing afterward. The air stank of fuel and burnt hair. Some bunkers were so fortified it took hours of repeated assault to silence them. Even then, some defenders burst out screaming, firing pistols until they were cut down. Others didn't wait to be killed. They waited until Marines were close, then pulled pins on grenades and disappeared into smoke. By mid-morning, the Marines began to move inland, yards at a time. Trenches crisscrossed the island like veins. Foxholes, dugouts, hidden tunnels, every position was booby-trapped or manned. The Japanese had buried barrels filled with gasoline and rigged them to blow. In some places, entire squads vanished in fireballs. Communication between units was patchy. In the chaos, Marines fired into friendly lines. Some men were lost for hours, crawling through shell holes, under the impression they were still advancing. No one slept. No one ate. Water was scarce and tasted like diesel. At night, the screaming didn't stop. Japanese soldiers made banzai charges, sometimes in groups of 5, sometimes 50. They rushed through the dark, bayonets raised, their own wounded among them. Marines fired flares, sprayed gunfire, slammed rifle butts into faces. In the morning, the sand was soaked black, the smell unbearable. By the third day, the resistance fractured. The Marines had crossed the airstrip and reached the island's far end. Pillboxes that once covered every angle had been gutted. Inside some, they found men still alive, covered in burns, praying, or waiting for death. One officer described the floor of a bunker as a single layer of charred bodies. The last holdouts died with their backs to the wall. Of the 4,800 Japanese defenders, only 17 were captured alive. The rest had fought to the last breath, the last cartridge, or had chosen to die by their own hand. The civilians, mostly Korean laborers, were found in shallow graves. American bodies were stacked by the hundreds in makeshift morgues. Some were buried where they fell. Others were wrapped in ponchos and marked with names written in charcoal. Burial details worked in silence, heads low, hands trembling. 3 days, an island no wider than a city block, and more than 6,000 dead. Tarawa wasn't just a victory. It was a warning. Thank you for listening to Last Post History. Subscribe for more true stories from the world at war.